Okay, let us return to that wonderful world, secondary world of civilized man, wherein is everyone's favorite hangout, local reality. Somebody straighten those out. Whoever read them, straighten them out. And specifically, wherein the intellect must take the processes of life, the erstwhile silent processes, and turn them into things specific. And a few more that we had started hitting on last time we were talking have to do with the myriad of examples everywhere of not only chopping up, as we were touching on, processes into things specific, but then also back into processes, and then back into things specific, and etc. But in such specific and well-known areas as religion, sociology, psychology, and if not even the world of academia, or maybe for you New Agers, extraordinary journeys and interest. Although in the last couple of meetings we hit some of these, consider very specifically, because this really has nothing, as always, to do particularly with religion or with psychology or with anything. It is that out here in the secondary world, in the singular world of man, these things take on, as they're supposed to, extreme validity. They take on precise outlines, and they have a job that is without question describable, if not listed in one of those great Dewey Decimal forms of the federal government, of a job description. But as always, there's something else afoot. There is something behind the secondary verbal clothing of this, and that is the energy. That is, the very things that ordinary people have no interest in, not supposed to have an interest in which are just barely. When all the houses are in the right planets, or vice versa, and all the burglars are in the right houses, or whatever. When everything's just right, and the humidity is not too bad, and the wind chill factor is tolerable, some of this just almost makes sense. And of course, then that's a long way from that to, well, yeah, but what's the importance of it? Which I got to admit to lie, because if it begins to make sense, you don't worry about the importance, because then it is a form of singular pleasure. But let me take religion, that we hit on just for a second before, but consider that from one view, religion's job is to take quite ordinary processes of man, such as the processes of fear, of failure. Now remember that we're talking about the secondary world. We're not talking about any kind of primary failure, because primary failure results in the immediate purchase of a rural property, buying the farm. So that's not failure, that's death. But failure is a secondary enterprise and undertaking. So these ordinary processes, such as fear, failure, which of course is subcategory of fear or failure, but fear, failure, illness, and then death. Not the same thing as primary failure, which is death, but the fear of death, the secondary world's knowledge of death. Now it is one of religion's jobs, and you do not have to be involved with very fundamentalist religion, but it turns these things, these processes, into things specific, such as the example that we covered a couple of nights back, of turning them into demons of fear. Satans, but just generally in the Western world they'd be referred to as demons, into actually things specific, into spirits. And they even direct prayers, go through rituals in all the great Western churches and the Eastern, but of personifying, which is making things specific from a process, personifying these natural processes wherein they have become things specific, and then of course wherein you can apparently deal with them. That is all the way from such great Old Testament stories as Jacob wrestling with an angel, which I don't really want to go into the kind of questionable things that might be going on with two men wrestling in the dirt back then when they were not wearing reasonable Western clothes to begin with. I don't want to go into it. But at any rate, the point is, it is humans, that is, now we're talking about secondary world people. We're not talking about simply Homo sapiens sans intellect. We're talking about fully functioning humans who can talk. That is, who are now part of the creation of their own secondary world. They now wrestle, or in some way have intercourse, figuratively speaking, have intercourse with processes that have been personified. I know I said that twice, and psychology uses what I'm really referring to is it has taken processes and turned them into chop, turned them into things specific, and then literally, if not figuratively, but then literally, as though then man can deal with them. That as long as we are talking about the demons of illness. Now, some of you that may not have been around the block more than 4 or 5 times may think that that is some modern day manifestation of these TV evangelists, that not only they pray against demons of illness, they pray against demons of usury or MasterCard, demons of debt. And, oh Lord, let our people free them from these demons of debt. Nothing about a process that these people went out and just taking an ordinary view and description that they willfully, of their own volition, went into a Kmart and applied for the big K card. Went in debt, bought the stuff, used it, but now it is taken not as a process, but it is a demon. It is a thing specific. It is not simply fundamentalist churches circa 1990. It has always been there. It is in every religion, and I'm not going to try and give some kind of exposition of religions, but it's in every so-called religion on this planet. If they have a god, they've got demons, whatever they call them, and the demons are not simply taken as being one big anti-god, in the same way that their gods are not taken as being one big god, because if it was, he'd be a process, or she, and there'd be nothing else to say. And of course, if they knew how to do that, they would not have named him or her in the first place. So once you've got a god, the god's got a whole bunch of what? Characteristics. That is, he is no longer a process, he has become a thing specific. That the Western God, I think, is called all kinds of stuff. Omnipotent, omnipresent. Characteristics are simply taking a process and turning it into things specific. And once they do that, you've got no choice. In the same way, once you decide that's up, you can bite your tongue forever. You and all of your clan can decide, all right, we're going to come up with a word for that, but we are not going to come up with a word for. And you can all take some kind of blood oath that, all right, we're going to call that up, but we're not going to call that anything. We're just going to like it. You can do that all you want to, and you got no choice. Those of you that begin to suspect the validity of that might also consider the other thing we were talking about a while back, the possibility that words are actually living, separate entities, which would explain such things as why you cannot make up one word. Not just one word period, as we've been through, like you've got to have more than one word to even talk, but if you come up with a new area, if you discovered a whole new area of the universe that no one had seen, or if you got your hands on some great accelerator somewhere and you discovered at the other extreme, in the sub-particle world, a whole new area that no one had ever seen, so that you could name. It's your prerogative to name it. And you decide, I'm going to name one aspect of it, and I know there are two. Let's say that you knew that, but just for some kind of perverse pleasure, knowing the kind of guy you are, you decide, I'm not going to name both of those aspects. I'll let them figure it out, or I'll spring it on them later. I'll name one now, and I'll draw it out, and I'll, milk this thing for all it's worth, and then I'll discover, the other thing a couple of weeks from now when they get tired of me. No matter what you do, you can swear, I'm going to name one of them. If you name one of them, it's opposite, it's counterpart, it's parallel reality. Its other side will be named. You can't stop it. You can try and put a monkey grip on your brain to start with. You can say, I will not do it, I'm going to name one of them. But notice, if you name one, it's like the other one names itself. You can't help it. That was parenthetical for those of you still wondering, is it possible that words are alive? Of course, I don't know why you're so behind. But if they have gods, they've got anti-gods. That is, other characteristics that they consider to be non-worthy become personified. They become things specific. And so there are, whether they call them that or, as I said, I just didn't want you to think that I was taking an example that was only relevant to very fundamentalist Christian religions in the Western world and the United States at this time. It is everywhere. That they personify, that is, they make processes that they find to be unworthy, that life tells them this would be under the umbrella generally of D-force taken in isolation. And it then makes the process into things specific as it must, or they would not be part of the vocabulary, the full vocabulary of the secondary world. And so it becomes demons of fear, demons of illness. That illness is not some natural process, or fear is not some natural process, that they would want to pray, to go through some kind of ritual, of free our poor brother, our sister here in this Greek mystery religion, or here in the great Jimmy Swaggart revival tent, or whatever it is. Catholic Church, everybody does it anyway. To say, please free this person from the demon of fear, of shyness, of greed. But do you not see that they have taken natural processes, whether you like them or not? You can say it's not natural to be afraid. It's not natural to be shy. It's not natural to be as submissive as I am. Or it's not natural to be as aggressive and dominant as I am. Let us assume for a second, I'm assuming that you caught some of this to start with, that as always, the secondary world is based on primary activities. And now they are talked about. They have become a secondary world within themselves, but they, to be existing in the secondary world, have had to become things specific taken from processes, cut, dried, pinned up into a thing itself, no longer just a process. It's an episode in some continuing drama. To do that makes it, apparently, become something that humans can deal with. And it's not seen as that way, though. It is not seen that the whole idea, or part of the whole idea of gods and anti-gods, is to take processes that are natural and turn them into that which is secondary. I'm not going to say unnatural. It would be if the world was only three-dimensional and the dichotomy of everything was the only thing available, then it would be unnatural to be afraid of illness, failure, death, I guess being the big one for most secondary good city people. And so it becomes the demon of death. And all religions have some form of a belief in a resurrection somewhere, that the big demon of death may get you. Of course, I guess they all got to admit by now, we've been around the plant long enough, that they probably got to admit, yeah, it is going to get you. But this thing can be overcome, not the process. Because death is no longer seen as being some sort of process. It's seen as being some kind of bad accident. Seen as being some sort of unfavorable act that the gods have put upon man for reasons best known to them. But it has become represented as being a thing specific. That it is Satan's fault, it is Lucifer's fault, it is the anti-God's fault for doing this. And therefore it can be dealt with. I was going to try and drag this out a little bit and let you try and seep up like a wet basement on some of this yourself. But consider as we go along, at least what I'm trying to hint thus far. There was a hint in there besides what I said. How about into ideas a little, I guess most people connect it with religion, but it has a certain flavor and interest of its own, and that is into things extraordinaire, evidently, into these dreams, religious and at times in history otherwise, of extraordinary searches, hungers, adventures. The legends, the myths, and religions, of course, are full of these stories. But it starts off as the idea of some great mythical quest, some great hunger that is of an extraordinary nature, which, of course, we're talking about now a process to go off on some adventure. But even here, don't worry about your quizzical looks. I'll let your face go in just a second. It won't hurt. You'll see. These processes then have to become thing specific. And they end up being such things as the Holy Grail. the Rhine Gold, Jerusalem, the secret book. And they seem to have real validity outside of the stories that you, if you're an ordinary intellect, might discount as being truly just myths and legends. There is this very strong belief already built into the human nervous system that there is a secret, the path of which man, from which man is either strayed or has yet to find. But the path would be synonymous with a secret. But notice it is a real thing. And from that flows the myth that there is a holy book, there is a secret scripture somewhere. Or Jerusalem, there's a form of that, of some sacred city even before death, that verges somewhere in most religions between the actual area of the humans and then the kind of holy area that maybe not real gods exist, but people quite superior to humans. And that these cities, Jerusalem, represent something that could be found. And a process cannot be found. A process can be done. A process can be participated therein or in. But for something to be found, it has to become thing specific. If it is going to be achieved, it cannot be perceived as being a process. It has got to be to the point that it is a thing specific. There is, you might consider an aside note to this, that when these matters extraordinaire, whether they be limited in someone's mind to religion or some expanded version of a quest for some supremely profitable, interesting thing, book, secret, city, artifact, relic. The basis of it is seeking power, dominance, the ability to overcome some problem. The ultimate problem in secondary world's mind is death, of course. But notice when it gets down to the level of being thing specific, then it can no longer be considered in any way that it is a process of power. It has to become a thing of power. And as long as it's a thing of power, it is open then to whether it can be found, or if it is found, it can be lost. Someone can take it away from you, or you could find it, and then whatever forces are involved with such things could decide, well, you're not as worthy as we thought, or aha, so you've gone back to smoking, give it back. Or aha, I don't like the way you're keeping up the place that we let you find. As long as it is a thing, it is barterable. It is part of commerce. It can be dealt with in the marketplace of the ordinary mind. In other words, there is no doubt that it can be found. It can be had. But the aside I wanted to really point to is consider this. Well, let me give you a short version. Processes demand effort. Things merely acceptance. I say the short version, and I fear that that might be too short. But it amounts to this, that processes do demand effort and participation. Whereas things simply require acceptance. Or, if you like, belief. But acceptance. As long as there's simply a thing, as long as you say that the purpose of life should be to discover the secret. Now, as long as a process has been turned into a thing specific, as long as you're dealing with a thing specific, that if I could find the Holy Grail, and you can consider that symbolic into even other religions, but if I could find this relic, if I could find, which they say still exists somewhere, the actual jawbone of Buddha. Not just these little pieces of his fingertip and that stuff. You can buy that in bazaars over in New Delhi and in Rangoon. Don't go there just for that, however, because the food is terrible. But and the music, they're still listening to Twisted Sister over there. But the relic of the Holy Grail, Moses' spear, as long as it is a thing specific, you understand nothing else is required. Now don't fall into the trap of saying, well, you got to go find it. No, you don't. Do you see everybody climbing over each other, those that believe in such things? I mean, is there a stampede? If you decided, well, I am going to find the Holy Grail because I have read enough, I've thought enough about it, and there's enough, at any rate, that you went along with those kind of myths. So if you could find that, you would have your own form of dice Rheingold. That you would have something that would give you power, wisdom. Just you'd have it made. How about let's say it that way? And there are many people on this planet, many people who believe that. But do you see a stampede? I mean, if you announce, I'm going out and look for the Holy Grail, do you believe that if you said that, and some people said, all right, and you said, well, adios, and you walked off, that suddenly from the hills and out of the woodwork behind buildings, people would be running and staying right behind you and tracing your every step? Such as you'd be, they consider that you might be the one who first discovered Sutter's Mill. That, hey, we'll stick with this guy, we'll all strike it rich. Who cares? Think about it. Because once it is made thing specific, even if it is extraordinary, even if it is accepted to be the Holy Grail in its widest symbolic, not just metaphorical, but symbolic even, sense, as long as it is taken to be a thing specific, all you got to do is accept it. No effort is required. You do not have to go look for it. All you got to do is go, ah. But if it was still, whatever would have been the process that would have produced a thing specific such as the belief in the Holy Grail or Moses' original staff, not that second one, not the one he picked up later, but the original, Buddha's jawbone. Whatever the processes were that produced this thing specific, if you could go back, taking it three-dimensionally and describing it, if you went back into the process, you've got a different story, because to pursue that would require your participation. In other words, the short version, processes demand effort. Things, merely acceptance. Things, merely belief. More of the same hint that I was talking about, if you don't see any connection. How about let's shift sideways into that other popular area of psychology. Plus, I can pull out the old game of, as a matter of fact, I was just watching television the other day. But there was this psychologist, and in the midst, the general thrust of his program seemed to be, it was a discussion of the problems in family dynamics. And suddenly, there in the midst, and he was obviously not acting as a political apologist for anyone, trust me, but there in the midst of talking about all of the whiny problems of being a human and being a mother, being a father, and raising children. And just as I was about to drift off, the gentleman, I repeat, it was obvious he was not involved with politics and he was not attempting to be an apologist for anyone, but while talking, he suddenly, from this, said, you people would not believe, and he obviously had some kind of real information or thought he had read, you would not believe the kind of abused child Joseph Stalin was. For those of you on tape, if I got to do it, there's no critique of psychology. This man has got nothing to do with politics. But it is a prime example. Now, I could drag this out and extract, and you should be able to do it to yourself now, 4 or 5 more, at least, dozen kind of pinched, nervous laughs to get into such areas as this. But this man was quite serious, just as psychology is serious in the secondary world. He has taken the process, and I'm just using this, and I'll repeat one more time for you people, it's got nothing to do with Stalin, Russia, politics, psychology. But notice, here's what's going on right in front of your, I'm sure what you're oftentimes pleased to call your brain. It's going on, and people take notes and take it very seriously. But that's not the half of it. Can I turn a phrase or not? If I knew more about math, in fact, I think I've overstated it by saying it's not the half of it. But be that as it may. The person took what is historically considered to be, let us say, the process known as Stalin's reign of murder and mayhem. How about that? The whole process, from all I understand, that was not all that agreeable to the people living under the flag of the Union of the Socialist Republic from whatever it was, 1929, up until the man's untimely death. As sad as it is, when Papa Joe went, there seems to be now a great deal of historical evidence and even some living witnesses that say living during that period was not like Six Flags over Texas. But this psychologist, this is a piece of life's body talking through man, it was quite serious, and he went into more details, but at least he pointed out that it was probably not well known, but he said, trust me, and I think he did refer to some book or some other psychologist's research. He said, you would not believe, and these are almost his words, he was very serious, he said, you would not believe the kind of abused child that Stalin was. And he paused a second, he couldn't help it, and he paused, and you were supposed to pause if you were tied into this kind of flow of energy in the ordinary or secondary world, that, and you were supposed to be intelligent and sophisticated enough to know that Joseph Stalin was not a nice guy, according to all history. And you're obviously supposed to have some knowledge of contemporary psychology. And so he simply took this opportunity to point out Joseph Stalin was a severely, you wouldn't believe how abused he was as a child. Now here you have a great moment of episodic reality. A prime example of the secondary world is far beyond in the three-dimensional sequence of things, ordinary religion. We're now into the world of psychology. That not only, let's say that you're sophisticated enough that your brain works at least as fast as it's supposed to, and you know all the terrible things that Stalin did. It was not a good era in which to live. The man was heartless. The figures are climbing up into the 20 and 30 millions of his own citizens they claim he killed for no reason other than to stay in power, as if there was another reason. That, along with, you were in the midst of watching this psychologist talk about family problems and pointed out what an abused child Joseph Stalin was. And then he pauses to take a sip of water or something. And now you are left with the fact abused children, according to psychology, are everywhere. I think it's 9 out of 10. It's just we're getting to the point now to be able to talk about it, and so we realize that 9 out of 10 of us were abused children. I'm repeating what I've heard on TV, so I don't question it. But notice, the man said you would not believe what an abused child Joseph Stalin was. You see all of the potential episodes that can flow from this. All of the things specific, such as, Jesus, holy mackerel Christ. Do you realize we could be surrounded by potential Joseph Stalins? I could be raising one. I mean, I can't help that I have to knock this little nipper around a lot. He bugs me. But my God, that's the same sort of thing that he's telling me brought about the death of somewhere between 20 and 30 million at the last estimate because he got abused. Hey, we're talking serious stuff. We're not talking about some kind of phony baloney thing about, well, let's all go out and search for Sir Lancelot's sword somewhere. Or, a lock of Jesus' hair. We're talking about stuff that actually exists. This was in my lifetime. That man murdered millions of people. And it may seem somewhat questionable, that kind of thing. In certain circles, that is not looked upon kindly. But until you realize, according to this guy, this doctor, that the man was unbelievably abused as a child. It gives one lots to think about if one doesn't have much to think about. If one's brain is easily entertained, then that gives you a lot to think about. But do you notice it has taken a process? I'll repeat for you people who might be seeing this one more time. Got nothing to do with Stalin, nothing to do with politics, nothing to do with political murders, nothing to do with any of that, other than the fact that it is the dress of the energy. It took a process that could be known as the Stalin era, and all kinds of other things, as I called it, Stalin's reign of murder and terror. But it took a process, that is, life, and it made it a thing specific, and not only that, but it brings it up to date and gives it tacitly in a way that is truly, in the secondary sense, manifold and complex because it leaves it with you. Does that mean that every time you whip a child today, or too much, that you could be producing that? You could indirectly be the cause of 20 million people's deaths? I mean, if it was his father did that to him, are we going to blame Stalin? The man's father, some drunken maniac, no offense to his father, but whoever abused Joseph Stalin caused. We're not talking about some theoretical thing. We're talking he caused the death of 20 million people just because he couldn't control his temper. I mean, that's just one version. Do you see? Can you see life's use otherwise? Now, outside even the appearance of that, inside of each person. That kind of inner psychohistory, psychobiology, as I think it's called. That it uses it with you and you turn it on yourself. That you are still doing that same sort of thing. Whether you're doing it religiously, you may now be doing it psychologically. Back at the old building site here of the brain, that you do your own, part of what memory's job is, you do your own psychobiology of you constantly. You don't hear me? And I was being magnanimous to this guy when I said he was not really acting as an apologist for Stalin. But people do, without having any choice, they do act as an apologist to themselves. But you're all doing it on the basis of, well, sure, I killed 20 million people, but God Almighty, you don't know how my father used to treat me. Sure, I made it crude and good for a laugh, but many of the people I'm referring to are crude and good for a laugh. No, that was just a crude laugh. But you're constantly doing your own psychobiology. Just as fast as the mind will think, just as fast as memory will pull out the index cards, you're doing that to you. Well, sure, I'm a bastard, but you don't know what I went through. And you don't even have to say any more. The psychologist says, you would not believe how abused Joseph Stalin was as a child. He didn't have to say any more. Not if you're sophisticated. Not if you're intelligent and up to date. He didn't have to drag your brain right up to the TV set and try and rub your nose in what he meant. All he had to do was kind of look like, you know what I mean, and you knew what he meant. When you say, well, sure, I'm no good, but you don't know what I've been through. My father, you don't know my father, Leonard I, Sr. That's all you got to do. And to you, that's the same thing as Joseph Stalin. You know, say no more, say no more. I can fill in the blanks, in as much as there are no blanks. But yes, I know exactly what you mean. And so you have played your own version of instant, uncontrollable psychobiography on you. In the world that we already hit a little bit, I just remind you that we were talking about last time. If you looked at all of this, if you wanted to for a second, the secondary world of being, perhaps more specifically, more precisely, is the world of the intellect, the world of academia, the dynamics of such things as labeling other people's creative life, their creative processes, as being their work, being their product, or being an example now of some school of philosophy, some school of history, some school of poetry, some school of art. You have turned it into a thing specific. And of course the continuing criticisms, the revisions, the remodels of what has gone before. the reconstruction, the deconstruction, the re-deconstruction of it. It is the continuing process of rebreathing apparent life into secondary dead ends, schools, fait accomplis, things that have been made specific, and it continues to be revived by all forms of criticism, review, and what is actually the most popular. It just doesn't seem to be widespread enough in its normal connotations to fit most people's brain, but I tell you it is. You understand this, you understand everything. All of what seems to be the continual revitalization of things in the world of the intellect. Criticism of something, and then you bring it back up. Or you try and put your particular spin on somebody else's previous criticism of someone else. That you are, in a sense, not pejoratively speaking, but let us say someone now could be making their literary living, their academic living, off nibbling at the maggots that ate the fleas, that ate the ants, that originally ate Jonathan Swift's bones. That you're doing some kind of fifth generation critique of Swift. And not too swiftly at that. But you can be doing that, and it's like you dig the son of a bitch up, you know, poor old guy, and then you lay him back down. Then you dig him up, and then somebody else lays him down. And then you dig up one of the grave diggers that dug him up before you to criticize him. That is the nature of this secondary world. And yet you've got people that could hear me do something like that, just for a second go, aha, you're my kind of guy. You're as big a smart ass as I am. But they're in there too. They could be saying, listen, at one time I was interested in an academic life. I almost majored. I'll tell you this far. I went so far as I signed up to major in English Lit. I don't know what. I even pictured myself teaching. And then perhaps on the side, growing a beard and growing some leather patches on my elbows. And beginning to write. Beginning to do my own thing. And then this person could say, but I began to realize that whole world of academia, that whole world of criticism is nothing but a farce. Because you just said it. You just said it. All they do is they dig up the bones of somebody. Somebody digs up Poe and said, well, he wasn't that much. And somebody says, I didn't say Poe, I said Pope. And he says, oh, well, he wasn't that much either. You don't like it when it gets confusing, do you? All right. Somebody digs up Tennyson. Dig him up, critique him. They get tenure off the basis of critiquing Tennyson in a way that was tenuous and terrible. Plus they got docked few points for excessive alliteration, I know. And so the person gets tenure and makes a small reputation over attacking this poor old dead man. So then he drops back down. They forget him for a while, at least under some local condition. And then the next generation, one of this guy's students comes along and decides he would like to teach. And so he doesn't even bother to dig up Tennyson. He digs up this professor he had that had made his living. So you didn't lose your place, did you? Now we're back to the guy that says, that's why I didn't go into that world, because it's nothing but, you had it, maggots eating fleas, fleas eating ants, ants eating maggots. It's everybody making their living off the bones of other people. And I just wouldn't have any part of it. But you do understand? He's right in the middle of it. But although he's correct, he's standing aside. He said, nah, I decided rather than that, I'd take up some kind of honest profession. I became a locksmith. No, I don't make keys, but I became a locksmith. And he's saying, and so I'm telling you, as much I still read, and I've kept my mind alive, but I'll be damned if I was going to have any part of that kind of just makeshift, phony baloney world of criticism, back and forth, and making your living off somebody else, and then making your living not even off the original person, but now you're making your living criticizing those who criticize the original school, known sometimes now as the Blue Rider, or the Impressionist. I thought I knew something about the school, and now we got a man who said Impressionism died, I don't care what they say, with Surratt. I don't care that he's got a play on Broadway. It died with him. But then I realized, wait a minute, I could twist that and say Impressionism never died. Remember, we're back to my locksmith. And so he says that whole world is so He might say something like this, specious and spurious, I know. He might say that and say, I will have no part of it. And he is in the midst of it, but you understand, from a three-dimensional view in the secondary world, you're correct. He's correct. He's got nothing to do with it. He wouldn't go near a university. He would not go near a reading. He would not read criticism. Oh, he might read some, but he doesn't discuss it. As far as he's concerned spatially, he is absolutely no part of that world. And he is every part of it. You do understand? That is, I was going to say, the real ultimate world, if you can see it, can simply be wrapped up, all of that, in the world of quotes. That's what I was getting at. You got to stretch your brain maybe to see it. But it's always in style. Everybody does it, and all criticisms. To divide up this kind of continuing use of verbal reality wherein the world is made into things specific from processes, to wrap up that which I was trying to classify sort of left over from psychology and sociology and religion into the world of the mind, the world of academia, you can call all of that the world of quotes. No? It's the rechewing of someone else's meal. It is the normal, natural world, intellectually, at local levels, but it is not all there is. If it is, I couldn't even say what I just said. Of course, if you didn't hear it, I couldn't say it. All right, I knew you wanted to say that was clear enough. Also take note, it should be real clear, with the way we are describing this, that in this sense, the primary world is one of processes, and the secondary, one of things specific. I guess we should go ahead and say that specifically. And there is another aspect tied to this, all of it. Life makes men unquestionably believe, think, and accept that all worthy processes will ultimately pay off as a reward of a thing specific. You cannot escape it. You can be religious, you can be atheistic, you can be literate, you can be academic. But it is already built into the human nervous system, the belief that all worthy processes, that is, remember the processes are indicative of the primary world, that all of those worthy processes will ultimately pay off as a reward, but the reward will always be as something thing specific. All hardships are going to have their own Rheingold. The ordinary intellect simply cannot perceive processes being their own payoff. It simply does not. Since we're still here, maybe I've been unduly influenced by that showing this week on sequential nights of the Met doing the Ring. But at any rate, I was thinking back that in these stories, which are closer in a sense, I don't mean they're better, but they were closer at one time to the primary energies that produce these kind of legends, but the good old Norse tales of the gods, as they were called, that the gods themselves, whatever efforts they were making, they still did on the basis back then, and the Greeks had their own version, but the Norse still, in a sense, got a little more specific pointing to it, that the gods themselves, through their efforts, were still expecting a payoff that their efforts, that is, processes, would produce a thing specific. Again, taking their idea, remember the head god, in their sense of it, of Odin, gave up an eye to get smarter, for more wisdom, and he was the head god as far as humans were concerned. Actually gave up an eye, went to seek more wisdom, and the person that had it said, yeah, all right, there's more, I can tell you more, you don't know it all. And the god, the head god, gave up an eye. Or, even beyond that, with him came his great, I threw in great, part of his recounting of 9 whole nights on a windrock tree hung I. Wounded by a spear, I was offered to Odin, myself to myself, on a tree in a wind of which no man knows. I always like that. Think about it. The head god admits that he went past the point of giving up an eye, which I give him credit, at least he can give up both eyes. But he gave one eye, but then he even went further. He found somebody else that even knew more. Well, the point was, those of you that don't recall reading, was how to, in a sense, read three-dimensional reality. Not just the wisdom that he gave up an eye for, and that was supposedly wisdom that was like a thing specific as always. It was in a well, and the person guarding it made him pay. Then he paid an eye. But then that wasn't enough. Then he found out that there was a possibility that you could read three-dimensional space itself. That is, that life on this planet, trees, rocks, everything had its own wisdom and could talk to you. But you had to know how to do it. And to pay that is what he later recounted. I got all this second or third handed at least. But of hanging, I still like it. But you got to remember, their idea of life after death was living in this cold hall with no heat, knowing that you're going to die again, so it doesn't seem that bad. But for him to take the process of being a god and to bring it again to something more thing specific, for 9 whole nights to hang in the wind on a tree, wounded, and then just to kind of recount it. You are dealing with, without people realizing it again, you are dealing with men made to believe, and of course then reflecting it into their idea of guides in this sense. Men are made to believe that any worthy process, and the process can be, apparently in the beginning, when I say worthy, it can be sacrificial, painful, but that all worthy processes, without any doubt, unquestionably, will pay off with a reward that is thing specific. Not a process, because the mind does not perceive that the process itself can be a payoff. Now, after having said that twice, enough of you have laughed and responded that you do hear a piece of that. That is, it makes sequential verbal sense in English, and yet the mind does not operate that way. At least I got anyone's attention drug in a strange place. Consider outside the idea of Norse legends. To live a Christian life, the process is nothing. The payoff is a thing specific. Immortality, life after death, another life. Take it to everyday affairs. It is wired into the human nervous system that if you diligently, let's take almost all parts of this planet now that have a secondary world in operation, that if you work diligently, faithfully, you will be rewarded. You can become rich and famous. But, notice, if the reward does come to be, you become a person rich. You become a thing famous. That there is a payoff. If I work real hard a process, then one day suddenly my accountant will call and say, all right, you can stop. I officially pronounce you rich. And you can go, phew. Or what I really want is fame. And the day comes that the person you consider famous, that you walk into a restaurant, all right, I'll say in Beverly Hills, that's where you want to be famous, and the person you consider famous suddenly looks up and punches their dining partner and goes, it's her, it's him. Then you know the effort paid off. because it has now become no longer a process, because the process, I'll say it a third time, the process, any process, processes cannot be, are not perceived by the ordinary intelligence as being a payoff themselves. The processes must be ultimately a thing specific, or there is no payoff. It is no reward. And although it sounds like a process to say, I would like to be famous, that's some sort of continuing thing to be famous. No, it's not. You have to become a thing famous. And we'll right now make it easy since we're out of time. It's up to you, is why I made the example. You would have to decide I'm famous. For a while you might have to ask your yes men, your underlings, am I really that famous? When I came to the restaurant last week when we were over at such and such, when we were in Rome, when I walked in, how many people actually turned around and went, now tell me the truth. As long as you got to keep asking, you're in the process, and you're not famous. When the day comes that you no longer have to think about when you walk in a place, am I famous? When the day comes that you do not have to call your accountant and say, can I buy another helicopter? It has to be that the process has reached the point that it has become thing specific, that you are a rich thing, a rich person. It's not a process of getting rich. You are now rich. The process is over. That you are now famous. I am a famous thing. It is wired in to believe, unquestionably, that there is a thing-specific payoff to all worthy processes, including your toil here in the cube, in the arbitrage line, in your toil, in your faithful, diligent toil for mother life. You will be rewarded. But the reward will be in things specific, not the processes themselves. All of this is how things are. And no one asked me, but I might add, and you'll see for yourself someday, maybe in a second, that not only is this how things are, it is how things are very, very efficiently, just my opinion, but I've got one hell of opinion. That was a joke for you people out there who may have some of your own opinions, which are actually funnier than mine, but, well, I give credit where it's due. But this is how things are. This is how the secondary world operates. That all processes must be made thing specific. That the ordinary intellect, if that is where you are still, from where you're still thinking and operating, it does not perceive of the processes as being rewards of their own. It simply cannot. It's not open to debate, even though it makes sense for a second, sequentially, verbally. And I do know, by the way, that it is said out in life at times that good hard work is its own reward. And I know that there are people that they'll interview a forward on whoever just won the NBA tournament, or whoever won the Super Bowl, or a man who just won the Nobel Prize, and they'll interview him and say, boy, I bet it's great to have that Super Bowl ring. I bet it is impressive to have now have the Nobel Prize in physics, or to have a Pulitzer Prize in literature. And I know that people will say, well, yes, it is humbling. I appreciate this little trinket and the money that goes there too, but my work, my efforts have been my real reward, which is, in chemical circles, known as an FL. That is, a bloody lie. Oh, it's true enough, but that is not so. I don't mean that the person is insincere that says it. It is that that's not possible. It is not possible. Even a person that starts out and says, well, I don't care if I ever get rich, I simply love what I'm doing. They may be sincere, whatever that means to you ordinary people. But it is wired in. It's not open to debate. It is not possible that one person here and there can in some way become so enlightened, so intelligent as to go against this. It's not possible unless they can inhale their own breath, unless they can turn themselves inside out. It's not possible. It is already wired in that any worthy processes will result ultimately in a thing-specific payoff. The mind cannot perceive of it otherwise. It just simply cannot be. So that is the way things are. I was going to add here in conclusion that if there be any other possibility to that, it could only be possible to an individual here and there, because there is no widespread escape possible from this. There's no need to. But if you are in any way, to get to experience any freedom outside processes being inexorably turned into things specific, without you having any choice but to pursue, if not actively, but pursue here inside of your own neurons, that anything worthy that's going on will ultimately pay off in a thing specific, for you to see the limitations of that if you do. And to try to do otherwise, it is only possible here and there. And it's not possible in the hint I'm trying to go, the secondary world itself. You cannot go in there and remodel. You apparently can, which is being a critic. Dig up the old house and whip those 2x4s in shape. Some of them will probably give you a better response than if you did dig up Pope. Dig them up, lay them back down. But remodeling will not do it. The only possibility is some form of movement. And in final conclusion, at least all of this week, these last 3 tapings, I was going to suggest that this could serve as the basis of some further thought, if not the basis of a good laugh.